Darius Gaiden is one of those shmups that seems almost universally loved in the shmup community, and even has a bit of a following outside of those circles. When people think of shmups from the PlayStation and Saturn era, this is one of the first games that usually comes to mind. This is also considered one of the high water marks of Taito as a shmup developer along with Rayforce. So this is obviously an important game in the history of shmups. Now, quite a few players have done commentary videos of their runs, and have posted runs on YouTube over the years. Kamadoma has posted plenty of commentaries recently on his different runs, and I recommend them to anyone trying to learn this game. More Salty also has a great commentated run that I will have a link to as well in the description. And I finally cleared this game after many years of playing the game casually. However, instead of doing a typical commentary of my own run, I'm going to focus more on how this particular game got me into arcade shmups. I will touch upon gameplay elements and I will be showcasing footage of my 1cc, but this game is more important to me than just another clear. This was my gateway into arcade shmups, and I'm going to tell that story the best I can, because I think a lot of shmup players may be able to relate to this. To be honest, I had very little experience playing arcade shmups prior to Darius Gaiden. At that point, I was mostly playing some PC Engine shmups on the side, which I had gotten through the Wii Virtual Console, and I would play those in between playing other types of games. I think I might have also gotten Ironclad for Neo Geo off of the Virtual Console around this time as well, which was the first time that game had gotten released in the States. Now, I did have Galaga and Galaxian growing up on Namco Museum, so I played those two games on and off. I also had a chance encounter with Strikers 1945 Plus at a nearby supermarket, where I got crushed in like a minute playing on the machine, and it was the North American version, so I only had 2 lives per credit. Needless to say, that one in particular was not a great impression of arcade shmups for me back in the day. Also, while my first shmup I ever owned was R-Type DX back in the late 90s, that was on Game Boy Color and obviously a scaled down version of the arcade originals. While it is a solid port of the first 2 R-Types considering the system, it would not be fair to consider that a true arcade experience. Going back to the Wii Virtual Console, finding PC Engine games on it as well as Master System and Neo Geo games led me to start reading a lot more about failed consoles from back in the day and learning about many of the great forgotten games on those systems. I started reading Hardcore Gaming 101 pretty frequently by then, and I discovered Classic Game Room around this time. I would also read shmups.com and the reviews posted there, and soon after, because I was starting to look for more shmups, I eventually found out about Darius Gaiden. Because I was also collecting Windows 95 games around this time as well, I ended up finding out that this game had a port for Windows 95 and it was pretty cheap at the time, like less than $10 used, so I ended up getting it. The interesting thing about this version is that not only was it based on the Saturn version, it ran straight off the CD and did not require an install. It worked fine on my Windows Vista laptop that I was using at the time, and it even worked on my Windows 8 laptop later. So when I finally set up my controls and got started playing the game, the first thing that blew me away was the presentation. Now, I knew from seeing screenshots online and watching reviews that this game was well ahead of the PC Engine shmups that I was used to playing, from a visual standpoint at least. However, it's a totally different thing to actually play the game and see it for yourself. The 2D artwork blew my mind from a detail standpoint. Seeing the first boss fight and that big mechanical fish animated so well blew me away, and so did the explosion after you beat him. The environments were a mix of sci-fi and organic environments, with an extra emphasis on the aquatic. I had never seen a shmup prior to this have so many aquatic themed enemies, and some of the stages like Zone C embraced this theme completely. The only other game I had played prior that had mixed aquatic themes with space themes was Echo the Dolphin. But that's not even a shmup, and honestly that game could get its own video. Also, as soon as the first stage starts, the music gets your attention and you notice right away how unique it is. There is nothing quite like the Darius Gaiden soundtrack, and it is amazing. It fits the sci-fi aquatic aesthetic going on with the art direction perfectly. Extremely atmospheric while still keeping pace with the action of the game. That song playing in the first stage still gives me goosebumps sometimes, even though I've heard it so many times at this point. What was cool about having the Windows 95 version was that if you could play the music itself in a CD player using the disc. I'm pretty sure you could also do this with the Saturn version as well. I think both of them use Redbook audio if I recall correctly. I found out later that Taito's in-house band, Zuntata, did this soundtrack as well as the soundtracks for just about all of Taito's arcade games after the early 80s and throughout the 90s. They elevated every single game they made a soundtrack for, if you ask me. Definitely one of the greatest in-house bands in video game history. When it came to my early impressions of the gameplay itself, I loved it, but I had no shmup skills over a decade ago when I first started playing the Windows 95 version. I would get crushed and lose all 3 of my credits about 3 stages in usually. If I got lucky, I might have gotten to a 4th stage sometimes. I didn't know about the importance of autofire back then, so I would just hold down that shot button and use the pitiful built-in autofire and hope for the best while spamming bombs, especially on bosses. Once I ran out of bombs, I was pretty much screwed until I died and got some more bombs, and then I would eventually game over and have to use a continue, and then run out of those. I couldn't read patterns and misdirect bullets back then to save my life, so I was just flailing around and reflex dodging. That's really all I was doing. And that wasn't enough to get far into that game at all. I remember thinking things took a while to die with the default autofire, but I didn't know better back then like I alluded to earlier. I just thought it was a skill issue on my end, and honestly, there was a lot of truth to that anyway, about my skills being very lacking. Because I kept dying so much and losing credits quickly, I didn't get to truly experience the power-up systems, or rank for that matter, or really the branching paths. I later found out that there was a cheat code, at least on the Saturn version of the game, to have better autofire, but I couldn't find any signs of a similar code existing for the Windows 95 version that I played back then. Also, a small issue with both the Saturn version and Windows versions back then was that the game only ran at 30 FPS. Now, I was aware of this at the time I was playing it, but I didn't mind too much. Honestly, I was blown away by the game as a whole, and it just didn't faze me too much, even though usually I do prefer 60 FPS for games. However, one thing that I did appreciate and recognize even back then was that there were different paths. This game and Ironclad were the first shmups I ever played with branching paths of any sort, which blew my mind. This is something that adds so much more replay value to a shmup, or to any game for that matter. Even back then, seeing the differences between just Zone B and C, that was enough to impress me. I just wish I would have been skilled enough to see more of the game at the time and had access to better autofire. These branching paths would be something that I would also appreciate later on in Outrun. I would start playing that game soon after. Playing this game, even on the Windows 95 port, made me want to play more arcade shmups. And not too long after this, I ended up buying Taito Legends 2 on PC. That gave me an opportunity to play even more Taito shmups that I had never played before, like Ray Force, Metal Black, Gekurinden, and Gun Frontier. Plus, getting into Ray Force via that collection led me to get my first Dojin shmup, Kamui. Kamui was so impressive to me that it led me to check out other Dojin shmups, like the Xseed series. Darius Gaiden was also on Taito Legends 2, but this time it was the arcade version being emulated. Oh, and fun fact, the PC version of Taito Legends 2 actually included the MAME ROMs in different folders, and all you had to do was zip up the folders to run them in MAME. Of course, a lot of the ROMs included back then are now outdated, but can still be run in older versions of MAME. Beyond Taito, I started getting into other arcade shmups from other publishers. I got Castle Shikigami 3 on the Wii around that time, and that was my first bullet hell game. Eventually, I got some more Neo Geo shmups besides Ironclad, like Blazing Star, Polestar, and Twinkle Star Sprites. I always stayed on the lookout for stuff being released on Steam and GOG at this point. I got Raiden 3 whenever that first got reissued on Steam and GOG about a decade ago, so I played that a little bit. And all of this spun off of me playing Darius Gaiden. Eventually, once I got into doing 1-credit clears, I would come back to this game here and there. By that point, I was using an arcade stick and playing the game on either MAME Current or Final Burn Neo in RetroArch. With the 15Hz autofire that I was using from my arcade stick at the time and being able to recognize bullet patterns better, I was able to start improving and get further on 1 credit than I could on 3 back in the day. Unfortunately, I still felt like the 15Hz autofire wasn't enough, and I never really liked fooling around with standalone MAME, even though that version, the latest that was available at the time, did have an autofire plugin at that point. I ended up doing a lot of other clears of other games before finally coming back to this game again. Particularly, I came back to it after clearing Gradius 2's first loop weeks ago. I recently got a Mad Catz Fight Stick Pro that's modded with the Brook PCB, and that PCB supports up to 25Hz autofire, which is very close to the 30Hz that's preferred by most people who have 1cc'd this game. Going from 15Hz to 25Hz was pretty mind-blowing, as I expected. Enemies that took a while on the default autofire go down pretty quickly when you have that faster autofire. Sections like the part right before the Zone H boss, where a bunch of enemies rush you, are made much easier. Even certain sections of bosses, like the last part of the Zone L boss, where it shoots out a bunch of smaller popcorn enemies, can become almost trivial because of it. It's hard to imagine why Taito even made the decision to have the default autofire be so pitiful, considering that a lot of the enemies are kind of spongy by default. However, this is not the only game where they did this, as Gun Frontier and Metal Black to a lesser extent all have this issue, where a lot of enemies are spongy, making higher levels of autofire more of a necessity if you want to clear these games than something optional. Not as bad as in this game, but still an issue in both, and they came out before Darius Gaiden. Now I know that the M2 port is available nowadays on Steam, with the 30Hz autofire as an option, but I already had access to it on MAME via RetroArch, so I decided to just clear it that way. Plus, as nice as that Cosmic Collection is with the on-screen heads-up display and the first 2 Darius games, it is kind of expensive. However, I might still get it eventually if it goes on sale for cheap enough, especially for the other Darius games. Now obviously my improved autofire was helpful, but something else made an even bigger impact, and that was experience. I've already mentioned that I can recognize bullet patterns better than before, but also I've finally gotten better at horizontal shmups, since I've cleared the first 2 Gradius games as well as Salamander 2 this year. So I'm a lot more accustomed to the 4x3 horizontal perspective than I was before. As a result, I'm a lot more comfortable leading bullets and reading fixed patterns in horis, especially older ones where the environment is often a hazard. I know how to plan my bomb usage much better than when I first started playing these games. I also know how to leverage the level design and weapons. Speaking of weapons, after a certain point, you can power up enough to shoot through the walls. So I leverage that in the later stages of my route as much as possible, and the game gives you plenty of opportunities to do so. The shield system is very nice and also has level ups, and by the time it becomes gold, if you grab enough of the blue items, it gets to be super effective in protecting your ship, allowing you to take several hits before dying. Something that I couldn't appreciate back when I first played the game, but I do now, is the fact that this game does not punish you that harshly for dying. Dying is not necessarily the end of the run here. You do lose a couple of power levels on your shot. However, you do not have checkpoints to worry about. You keep your missile and shield levels, you get 3 more bombs, and the rank does decrease temporarily. While dying is certainly not ideal, at least you don't have full-on Gradius syndrome here, making this game more accessible to players going for a 1cc. Another thing that I appreciate more nowadays is being able to capture the mini bosses by shooting the orbs on them. By doing this, you can obtain a nice scoring bonus, not just in the moment, but even more if you once you see the game, because you get an in-game bonus based on how many captures you get. After zones B and C, however, these captures become much more difficult to obtain without killing the mini-bosses, especially if you're playing with the higher auto-fire. If you're playing for score though, you'll want as many of these as possible. Speaking of in-game bonuses, not only do you get extra points for capturing those mini-bosses once you've CC'd the game, but you also get a lot of bonus points for how many lives you have remaining. You also get a bonus for how many bombs you have in stock. So at the end of the day, survival still plays a big role in your score. The thing that I didn't expect to be a factor in my recent 1cc was the rank system. I did not realize how jacked up the rank could get in this game if you go a long time without dying and if you're fully powered up. I did 2 1cc's recently doing the ABDHLQW route, and in each of these clears, I got to the last boss on Zone W with a fully powered shot, either without dying or dying just once. And that boss ended up going through its sequences in different orders than what I had practiced with save states, and was a lot spongier as well. To the point where I ended up just spamming bombs and point blanking, getting down to my last life and using up just about all of my bombs to get the clear. In my save state practice with only 1 life remaining and being less powered up, that particular boss was not nearly as spongy and was more manageable with the right point blanking strategies. So rank does play a role in this game for sure. You don't necessarily need to manage it like it's Battle Garega or even a 90s Konami shmup like Parodius Da, but it is there and it is noticeable for sure. If you want to read more about the rank system in Darius Gaiden, I will have a link to the Shmups wiki page for the game in the description. If you're going for the 1cc, your run will end after the 7th stage, which could be either Zone Z apostrophe, V, W, X, Y, Z, or V apostrophe, in order from top to bottom. Z apostrophe and V apostrophe are supposed to be the best endings, while the other endings are a bit more mysterious, tragic, or just a complete joke, like the ending after clearing Zone W. The fact that there are several different endings gives this game a bit more replay value than your average shmup though. Also, some of these final stages are supposed to be harder than others. A popular route for getting a good score and a 1cc without too much trouble is supposed to be ABDHLQW. However, I am doing a slight variation on that, going ABDHLQW instead. I wanted to do this route because there aren't a whole lot of clears of this route in particular for some reason. There are some players out there who have beaten all of the final stages, and that takes quite a bit of dedication because you have to learn a lot of different stages in order to go down various different routes. I am open to coming back to this game in order to clear other routes, but I do not know if I will be doing that anytime soon. To wrap up this video, I am so grateful that I discovered Darius Gaiden back in the day. If it wasn't for this game, I don't know how much I would be into arcade shmups at this point. I think this game is a great recommendation for newer shmup players, especially those who want to play horizontal shmups, or just want something with more replay value than your typical game in the genre. It's a brilliant game and one of Taito's best games in general, and that's saying a lot because of Taito's legacy, not just as a pioneer of shmups, but as an arcade developer in general. So what are your thoughts on this game? Did you have a lot of fond memories playing this one? Have you ever done a 1cc of this game? Let me know in the comments. Plus a special thank you to all of you that have subscribed in the last couple of months or so. I have been blown away by the amount of new subscribers to the channel. I appreciate all of the support and feedback. I do have another discussion video in the works about Nintendo, so be on the lookout for that in the near future. So if you enjoyed this video, hit the likes button, and if you haven't subscribed already, subscribe for more content like this as well as 1 credit clears of arcade games. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.